who is a Republican political strategist right here in the Pittsburgh area. Mike, thank you, sir, very much for being with me. Appreciate
Thanks, John. Glad to be here.
You know, we're looking over these numbers out of the primary just held. And what we're seeing with respect to, first, the Democratic Party and the Democratic primary is that a larger percentage of the votes are coming out of the Philadelphia media market than out of the Pittsburgh and Erie media markets. And it used to be that Western Pennsylvania was more or had greater influence in the Democratic primary. Are you seeing a switch here? Is something going on here?
Well, I think we're certainly seeing a switch in terms of the geographic base of the Democratic Party. We're also seeing a significant shift in the ideological base of the Democratic Party. Southwestern Pennsylvania really was the place where you used to go to get Democratic votes. But these were kind of Bob Casey Democrats. These were conservative Democrats. These were Kennedy Democrats. These were not the Democrats of today, of Bernie Sanders and AOC. And clearly, as the Democratic Party has moved left, it has also moved further east. And, likewise, the Republican Party, moving more conservative, has moved more west. So we're seeing both ideological as well as geographic shifts here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
I will ask you about the Republican side because I know you know that well. But in terms of the Democratic Party, does that mean that we're now more likely to see candidates win Democratic nominations for statewide office coming out of the Philadelphia area?
I think if you're a Democrat running in the primary, having Philadelphia or even the collar counties, Montgomery, Bucks, Delaware, et cetera, under your name in a Democratic primary is going to be significantly helpful. And that is going to be helpful because their numbers are getting stronger. You're seeing registration advantages. You're seeing counties that used to be the Republican bastions, Bucks County, some of these others, Chester County even, turning to majority Democratic counties. And that's going to be a huge advantage for a Democratic candidate to come from southeastern Pennsylvania. But let's bear in mind the type of candidates that are also going to come out of southeastern Pennsylvania. They're going to be more liberal. And that is going to potentially make it more difficult in a general election, as you need to get, votes from all the 67 counties.
Yes, you're absolutely correct about that. You can't win on just the basis of Philadelphia alone statewide. Let me ask you about the Republican Party. You indicated perhaps there's a shift westward. Are we seeing more old-time Democrats registering and voting in the Republican primaries these days?
In southwestern Pennsylvania, we've seen a huge demographic shift. Counties that used to be Democratic bastions here in the West are now almost majority Republican counties. Westmoreland County, a huge former Democratic bastion, now fully controlled by Republicans, and I think Republicans have the majority of the voters in that county in terms of registration. Beaver County, a place that had the Aliquippa and Ambridge, these were really Democratic machines, and these counties are now controlled by Republicans. We've seen really over the last 10 and 15, maybe even 20 years, we've slowly started to see conservative Democrats, although maintaining their registration as Democrat, in general elections voting for Republicans. This, back in the day, was how people like Rick Santorum were able to win statewide. And we've begun to see a number of these folks actually start to switch their registration. So you do see a real shift. The East trending more Democrat, the West trending more Republican, both in performance as well as in registration statistics.
So for a general election, does that mean that Western Pennsylvania still is important and has as much clout as it ever had before?
Well, I think in a general election, Western Pennsylvania is critically important. I think, female candidates from southwestern Pennsylvania that are Republican, I think will do very well. And when we talk about Western Pennsylvania, obviously Allegheny County is the biggest chunk in terms of population. But as you move out to the broader counties in the region, those are areas that are certainly going to be up for grabs. So I think southwestern Pennsylvania, you're going to see it in this presidential year. You're going to see it in next cycle in the gubernatorial election. This really does become a battleground.
So, I mean, it's sort of a two-edged sword. We may be losing clout in the Democratic primary as a whole, but we still are important, this region, when it comes to who actually wins the election in November.
Yeah, I think the main issue that you're going to see happen because of the demographic and geographic shifts is that you are going to see Democratic nominees who are really much further left wing, which complicates a general election strategy where folks, in essence, try to move to the middle to get more voters than just their base. I think that's going to be the challenge for the Democratic Party over the coming years is nominating candidates that are outside the mainstream.
And your suggestion is that those who come out of the East are out of the mainstream?
I think that clearly, if you're coming out of the city of Philadelphia, which is still going to be the real base of the Democratic Party, that is a hotbed of progressive liberalism. You see it in their mayor, you see it in their city council, you see it in the candidates they send to the state house. So as you nominate candidates who are being elected by a much more liberal base, that's going to not be as palatable to a lot of voters throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania who are going to be more moderate or more center right. Again, I think that this is the challenge that happens to any party as they're kind of realigning. As they realign geographically, as they realign ideologically, we'll continue to see these growing pains. But the balance, as from a party perspective, is how do you nominate a candidate that is in line with your party's, as much of your party's views as possible, but that they're not so extreme that they can't be elected in November, where they can actually impact any of those policies that you all share. So I think that's a challenge that both parties are going to face.
Well, Mike Devaney, Republican strategist from Pittsburgh, we really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, John. Glad to be with you.
And our special guest is J.J. Balaban, a political strategist in the Democratic Party in Philadelphia. J.J., thank you very much for being with me. I appreciate that.
Nice to be with you, John. Good to see you again.
So you have been looking at these numbers coming out of the 2020 primary, Democratic primary, and it's hard to escape the conclusion that Western Pennsylvania may be losing some political clout, certainly in the Democratic primary. Is that true?
To some extent, it's true. Allegheny County still is as important and robust as it's always been. But what you've seen is a significant erosion in terms of Democratic clout, in terms of the counties around Allegheny County. In terms of Washington County and Greene County and Armstrong County, there are just a lot fewer people that are voting in Democratic primaries. And that becomes very clear when you look at the numbers. So the Pittsburgh, when I'm talking about Pittsburgh, I'm talking about the entire media market. The entire media market as a percentage of the statewide vote is just significantly less than it was even 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was about 29%. In the election that we just had in 2020, it was down to 23%. At the same time, you've seen a significant increase in terms of the percentage of the vote coming out of Philadelphia, in terms of the Philadelphia media market, which extends all the way to Allentown and to Reading. It used to be 10 years ago, it was around 38% of the vote. And in the primary that just happened, it shot up past 50% of the statewide vote came from the Philadelphia media market alone.
So what that suggests, JJ, is that while Pittsburgh area is going down in political importance, the Philadelphia area is going up?
Well, I mean, clearly there are more votes that are happening out of there. And again, I think I would just distinguish a little bit between the kind of immediate Allegheny County still cast either the second most and sometimes even the first most number of votes in a Democratic primary of any county in the state. Any Democrat running statewide has to figure out what the strategy is for Allegheny County. However, the market as a whole has seen its influence decrease because you have so many fewer people voting in the Democratic primary outside of Allegheny County in Western Pennsylvania. Why
do you think this is happening?
It's a combination of a couple things. First, what you have is, this is in line with what you've seen in general elections, right? Which is that outside of Allegheny County, it is harder and harder for Democrats to win in general elections. So what happens is that people are voting a different way, and then they re-register. So what you have in southwestern Pennsylvania is an aging population, combined with the fact that fewer people are registering as Democrats. At the same time, what you have is in the greater Philadelphia region, and again, I want to underscore, it's not just the city of Philadelphia. It's really, in a lot of ways, more of a suburban phenomenon. is you have people that are registering more and more as Democrats. These are counties outside Philadelphia that used to be majority Republican in terms of registration. And now all of the immediate suburban counties in Philadelphia are now have at least a plurality of Democrats. So you have more people registering as Democrats. And then in the age of Donald Trump, you have this, a much more energized, partisanized Democratic primary electorate that's choosing to vote. Let me give you one stat, just to give you one specific example. In the year 2000, Ron Klink, who was a congressman at the time, ran in a primary statewide for the U.S. Senate nomination. He was running against 5 people from eastern Pennsylvania. In that primary, if you take, say, Beaver County, right? Beaver County had a third of the population of Bucks County, which is a big suburban county outside Philadelphia. A third of the population. But if you look at the results from that 2000 Democratic primary, more votes were cast in Beaver County than in Bucks County, even though Bucks County had far more people. Why? Because in Bucks County, people weren't registered Democratic, and those that were registered Democratic didn't care to vote in the primary. Whereas Beaver County was overwhelmingly Democratic registration, and there was just an ethos of voting in the primary, that it was important to do. That hasn't happened in the years since, and it's probably not going to happen again.
Does this help Republicans in Western Pennsylvania? Is this now a more Republican area and important in the Republican primary, unlike the Democratic primaries?
Well, that's true. I mean, I think you raise a very good point, which is while the Pittsburgh market as a whole now has less influence in terms of a statewide Democratic primary, those people are re-registering as Republicans. And so as a result, the Pittsburgh market now has greater impact in Republican primaries. Again, but it can't be understated. Allegheny County still retains an enormous amount of importance in Democratic primaries. Because as you've seen, particularly in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, you've seen during the Trump era, a significant movement, Connor Lamb's election being a good example of this. You've seen a significant amount of movement towards Democrats. It's really just once you hit the Allegheny County border that it becomes a very different world.
But party primaries are important, JJ, because you cannot win state elections in November if you don't win your party primary in the spring. Are we going to see the day when most of our statewide politicians are from Philadelphia, the Philadelphia media market, like they were generations ago?
Look, I think it's important, as a Democrat, I would say it is really important that the people that we nominate represent every part of the state. You can't win as a Democrat if you cannot get votes out of Western Pennsylvania and specifically Southwestern Pennsylvania. And so one of the challenges we as a party are going to have to figure out is that how can we make sure that voices are being represented throughout the state and not just from one part of the state. So that is a danger.
Well, and in fact, in the 2020 general election, all 3 statewide Democratic row office candidates, Attorney General, State Treasurer, and Auditor General, come from Philadelphia or Montgomery County.
Look, I made the ads for Michael Lamb in his race for Auditor General, who's the Pittsburgh City Controller, and specifically one of our arguments were that a balanced ticket meant having someone from Western Pennsylvania on the ticket. That didn't work. On the other hand, as you know, there's Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, who's from Allegheny County, who definitely kind of represents the area, and it's going to continue to be an issue moving forward.
Well, yes, because right now he would be the only Western Pennsylvania statewide. And as with the resignation of House Speaker Mike Turzai and with Majority Leader David Reed stepping down, 2 years ago, Western Pennsylvania has less clout in the General Assembly than ever before.
Yeah, some of that, I mean, right. Some of that, though, is you just had the speaker step down and that'll be replaced, right? Things turn over in terms of the leadership, right? At some point, the speaker, the Republican speaker of the House was from Delaware County in suburban Philadelphia. That, that hasn't been true for a number of years. And then it was someone from Allegheny County. So, look, I think there's no question the Pittsburgh market still is the second most populous market in the state. It still is very important. I just think the difference is what you're seeing is a bit of decrease in influence in statewide Democratic primaries, but an increase in influence in statewide Republican primaries. So again, even with that decrease, it is still the second largest pocket of Democrats in the entire state in terms of markets. And so it still really matters a lot.
So the bottom line and last question, JJ Balaban, is that Southwestern Pennsylvania cannot be ignored or should not be ignored in either the primary or general elections?
It definitely can't. And look, if you want to see who's going to win in 2020 in the general election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, a lot is riding on Southwestern Pennsylvania. Because if Joe Biden can't do a little bit better than Hillary Clinton did in those counties surrounding Allegheny County, it's just going to be hard to make up that deficit of votes. Hillary lost by 44,000 votes. He needs to do a little bit better in Southwestern Pennsylvania than Hillary Clinton did. There's no question about that.
Well, JJ Balaban, thank you, sir, very much. Always good to be with you. Appreciate your thoughts and comments today.
Thanks for having me on, John. Good to talk to you.
Well, for a lot of folks, today was really the last day of work before the big 4th of July holiday weekend. So what can we expect?